might take this opportunity, Patrick, I'll just a moment, just so that I emphasize for the audience why we're here today, which is part of the consultation that has been commissioned by MOPAC, and really emphasizing the Black voices on policing in order to help to improve police accountability and scrutiny from a Black perspective, and indeed to really re-examine what is needed in order to help improve the Black racialized the Black experience of policing, which we know is one which is deeply racialized. And I would also like to surface that MOPAC has a commitment to anti-racism, and they stand against racism and really emphasize Black Lives Matter. And actually what this is about is to help to surface how to support that being demonstrably visible to all Black Londoners. So the consultation is an opportunity for to elevate solutions from Black Londoners and their allies to support MOPAC to overhaul its engagement and scrutiny activities, so that actually we can move towards building trust and confidence in policing from a Black perspective. So without further ado, Patrick, I want you to introduce yourself and answer the question at the same time, which is how can we make sure that community-led police accountability includes the right people and is representative of all Londoners, especially Black Londoners' experience of the police. Patrick.
That's a big question, Jacqui, and how long do you want? But a bit about me. So I suppose I've had different roles, working in the bond sector, working with Jacqui, particularly during Black Friday in Lambeth, and it's gone to greater things. I've worked for the NHS, I've had a spell being a council politician, and obviously been involved as a campaign activist around police accountability, Windrush, etc. And I'm also a cultural historian, so I've written lots of around Black history, culture, identity as well. So I can give you the answer you give me, the question you give me, Jacqui. I can give a historical perspective, or I can give a here and now perspective. But from a historical perspective, ever since the Metropolitan Police was first established, and originally the Met Police were established to catch enslaved people. That was the history, believe it or not, and there's lots of research work done on that. And how's that relationship changed over the last, 100, 250 years? That's a good question. I mean, from the time of Windrush, or even time before the Windrush, we've always had this uneasy relationship with the police. We've had more lows than highs with the police. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is about, as taxpayers, we pay our council tax, we contribute to Britain, to London, making London a great city, and yet we are disproportionately affected by policing. And there's loads of examples and evidence we can give. I mean, just only very recently, Inquest has just launched a major report, literally about a week ago, around deaths in custody. And again, if you look at the data, why is it that Black men particularly, and men and women, are disproportionately affected around deaths in custody? The second, another set of data is COVID. When we were meant to be at home during lockdown, why all of a sudden you have 24,000 more arrests for Black people during the period of the last over 2.5 years during COVID, when we're meant to be at home, etc., around lockdown? And there's lots of examples of that. And then obviously, if you're on top of that, if you look at the public confidence in the police, even though we've known for decades that mistrust with the police, it's only been cases around Sarah Everard, and now, I mean, if you look in the papers over the weekend, Guardian did a piece of research work, Observer, where there are one in every 100 police officers have committed some kind of criminal offence. So it doesn't give you that confidence in that. I'm currently in Willesden right now. I was actually at a meeting, Jacqui, just literally, which is taking place next door, where you've probably heard about alleged suicides of 2 young men in Brent. There's a community meeting taking place right now, organised by a number of community organisation, and they're asking some big questions about the police. You know, why did the police automatically jump to the conclusion it was suicide without going through any proper process? There's been, you know, why is it that the police were defensive, and now they've changed their statements about 3-4 times regarding the circumstances of the death of these young men in the community? It doesn't bode well around confidence building, and it doesn't bode well when we want straightforward answers. And if you don't know the answers, fair, we understand that. You've got investigation to do, but why don't you treat us around your investigative processes in a fair, proper, and respectful way? These are the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves. And I've been involved in lots of. I used to be a councillor. I've sat on scrutiny committees, interviewing, asking personal questions to police, to the borough commander about issues around stop and search. It's not. I almost like predicted that in 2011, when we had the uprisings or riots, if you want to call it that, in London, around the death of Mark Duggan. And then that went across to Hackney, and then over across to Croydon, etc. And I knew this was going to happen because even the ward I represented, I saw time and time again ongoing the way there was a disrespect. The police just disrespected young people. The police claim or state we have to do stop and search because we believe that this is a good way of intelligence. And it's a good way of finding information out. But it's how they do stop and search. It's so disrespectful for young people that even I know guys who are still angry how to stop and search in the 80s. Even now, after 34 years, they're still angry. That disrespect is still there. And if it was more respectful, maybe it would be a different dialogue. It might be a different type of conversation. But there's time and time again, there's this disrespect. It's almost like which is a bigger, which kind of highlights an issue around, some people use the expression Afrophobia with an I, or anti-blackness. Why is it that black people seem to be that target all the time? I'm not trying to say other communities are not targeted. Of course they are. I mean, but it seems to be that, and that's not, and it's a universal thing. It's America. You think it's bad here in the UK? We don't have the death penalty. We don't have the death penalty. I was in America last summer, and I was in Alabama. And in America, if you look on death row, and they don't do parole, by the way, when they mean life, they actually mean life. And I met a lifer, a very rare guy to actually come out of the US penitentiary system. I think he was there for about nearly 30 odd years. He's the most humblest person you could ever meet as well, Jacqui. Well, you would have to be humble if you spent 30 years in a solitary confinement. You have to do a serious reflection going on in your life, aren't you? To be quite honest. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your first question. I've gone on a bit, but it kind of gives you that. If you want this accountability, the police, if the police want to be inclusive, modern, some basic things around respect is really, really critical, really, really important. Otherwise, forget. I mean, I know that it's ironic that the police just last year started a major recruitment drive, when in actual fact, more police officers are leaving the police, more officers are more likely to be from a black or Asian background, more likely to be disciplined, and yet they want to have a recruitment drive, as if, hello, we can see what you're doing over here, police. So there's more work that needs to be done, and it's about accountability and respect.
My heart just felt so laden when you just spoke about our brothers in Alabama, you say that you met the lifer, having gone 30 years in solitary confinement, and I'm like, I feel that in my gut, you know, I really do. And I think that that's one of the feelings that as people who are Black, African and Black Caribbean, we actually have a visceral experience, a lived experience, the impact of what is going on in terms of our experience of policing is something that we all feel as if it were almost ourselves, because it is such a shared experience of, as a Black body, being disrespected, lack of dignity, even in conducting a stop and search, disrespect in terms of following due protocol when doing investigations, in some assumptions written all over the place. And this is what we are striving here to attend to. It's within that context that you've articulated. How do we make sure that that community-led police accountability is fit for purpose? What are your thoughts specifically on that? So you've described a lot of the context that we're operating in. I'm asking you, how might we improve that from a community-led perspective of accountability? What might that look like?
Well, there've been various attempts over the last 20 years of how the police have restructured their accountability and community engagement processes in London and other parts of the country, but mainly London. And I think sometimes, I can't even tell you what, even now, I don't know what the latest consultation fora, because it keeps on changing all the time. Some of it changes because of cuts in police budgets and they spend less money on the community engagement side of things. Some of it is to do with that some of the work is done within specialist teams of the Met around particular aspects. You know, if you remember the whole stuff around Operation Trident, that soaked up a lot of resources, and it was like a specialist team, which is really about targeting black inverted commas crime, especially connected with weapons of any sort, basically. And they were independent of the local borough commander. They just came to an area and they did their stuff, basically. And there were various accountability mechanisms linked to Trident. The problem is actually that there's nothing consistent around the police consultation forums. The only thing that is consistent, by the way, is scrutiny committee of local authorities. So that's quite important. You have a mayor, that's consistent. Today's MOPAC, but will MOPAC change? Will it change its structure? Will it change its name? Basically. Same thing with police complaints authorities. They change every 5 years. A bit like the NHS, actually, thinking about it. I think on that reflection. So there's no consistency around accountability. There's no consistency when you're doing complaints, or if someone wants to make an individual complaint of something they've witnessed and seen, or what they feel that they've been treated unfairly by the police. To me, it goes into the wash, basically. So I think if there's more consistency around accountability, I think that's quite important. I don't know if you remember, Jacqui, the NHS Constitution. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
People don't talk about it these days like they used to, but when the NHS Constitution was created, a lot of people were kind of aware of it. We need a similar one around the police and the community. We need that constitution. I know obviously you got legislation and stuff like that anyway, but if there was something like, just imagine in each borough or across London and the citizens, and particularly the Black community in London, here are 6 key principles in how we engage with you. And then that's further reinforced around accountability, scrutiny mechanisms on top of that as well. That's what needs to happen, to be quite honest. And then obviously for another mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has regular question times, and some question times focus on policing, but maybe it's having that regular accountability all the time. Sadly, the only time that when we do call the police or challenge the police, there's a death in custody, or like now, what's happened in these recent spates of suicides, and people have, if there was regular ongoing dialogue with the community and the police. That's not to say that you would have these quiet things would happen. I mean, for example, with Child Q, which I got involved in Hackney, I worked with Jacqui, who I supported. Her name was Jacqui Courtney. She was a mother of 3. She works in the City of London. Never been involved in activism in her life whatsoever. But when the Child Q situation happened, everyone up and down the country, especially in the Black community, we felt angry, didn't we? We felt angry. We thought of our mothers, daughters, nephews, nieces to be treated in that abusive way in school. It was outrageous, completely outrageous. And we knew full well that wouldn't happen to a white child. So why should a 15-year-old girl on a period, just before she's taking exams, to be strip searched by 2 police officers in school without the consent of their parents? Everyone felt angry. And but what happened actually, it's still ongoing, by the way, but there was a real big pushback. The police were defensive. They didn't want, eventually they didn't suspend the officers, they just reassigned them. But if it was the other way around, the full weight of the law would be down our necks, basically. That is why I support the idea of Sadiq Khan, who's written to the Home Secretary to say that if police officers have committed a felony, they should be convicted, they should be done. They're protected by employment law, ironically, basically. That doesn't give you that confidence, and it has to be a two-way process. We are told that we have to conform, but the police have to conform too. And I think that's quite important around accountability, definitely.
So there's a few, you're sort of indicating a few ways in which accountability and scrutiny mechanisms can arise, and using the example of Sadiq Khan's writing to the Home Office for the police to be accountable for when they've committed a crime is quite a significant lever. The principles as embodied by the NHS constitution could be applied per borough. However, I might question that the NHS constitution has somewhere in it a commitment to reduce health inequalities, and we know that commitment hasn't arisen. So, yes, to bring principles that are on paper to life is what I would be saying, and I don't know if that's kind of a proactive lever in a way, so that we might.
But you have to back it up. I was trying to say it's not enough. It has to be backed up by ongoing accountability.
Yeah,
so hold the police to account.
Yeah. So okay. So if you had an ongoing, if you had a blank page to design police-led, community-led police accountability in London, which areas of police practice, which powers should communities be involved in scrutinizing?
Well, you know what, in America,
blank page, remember.
So in America, senior police officers, some of them, well, it may not be a good thing, but there's some of them, almost, you've obviously got police and crime commissioners, but they're more politicians. But in America, if you're a judge or a senior police officer, you have to run to be elected for elections. Maybe, would that be a way? So if we had a right to vote, if you want our vote and you want to be appointed as the next commander, well, this is the things that you can take on board, because if you don't deliver, we're going to vote you out. That might work in certain boroughs, not in all. I don't know. I mean, that's one way. That's America.
Yeah, that's one way. Yeah.
It can be perverse, because again, when I was in America last year, especially in the southern states, they have this race down to the bottom. So they'll say, vote for me, and I'll make sure we'll keep the death penalty. So that could have a perverse reaction, if you know what I mean, in one particular way.
Yeah.
I think if you don't go on the election route, if you're going through an appointment process, why can't you have representatives of the community be on the recruitment panel? It could be, like, say, for example, this happens quite common within the NHS and local government, where you have a stakeholder panel. If you're applying for a senior role, why can't you have a stakeholder panel for the appointment of the borough commander?
Yeah.
And that you can use that feedback from the community. I think there's something wrong in that. These are senior public appointment roles.
Yeah.
with good salaries. So why can't they be subject to that compared to local government or the NHS?
Yeah.
I think also is as part of the induction process, they've got to spend time in the community. They can't be, if you are implementing or developing strategy or operational strategy, it's not good enough going to the odd community meeting and have a cup of tea or hang out with your favourite black person. You need to have some kind of induction process to understand some of the key issues in the delivery of your service, because it is a service in the community. So that's just some examples I could think of.
Yes, because it is a service in the community. And so what areas of, what powers of policing and particular areas of police practice do you think our communities need to pay attention to when they're scrutinising the police? What are the key areas of concern in these times around how the police are using their powers, or the areas of police practice that are of particular concern, that when we're looking at scrutiny and accountability from a black perspective, we need to pay attention to? What are those areas?
I think there's a couple of areas. I think one area which is, I know dear to you, Jacqui, is whole stuff around mental health and policing, and whole stuff around Section 136. I know that there have been some improvements. You got Section 136 suites, and there's more. You got CPN nurses in police stations. I mean, I've got a sister, and she's a CPN, and she's based in the police station in Wolverhampton, and she's been doing it for now 4 or 5 years. But that only happened, Jacqui, that because there was a lot of pressure put on the police. There was an inquiry which was chaired by Lord Dyer to look at mental health and policing, and there were deaths in custody around people with mental health problems, and all these factors, campaigners, reports, etc. And it's not perfect, because there are certain parts of the country where they don't have those suites, but that would have been that's something that was an example of.
Yes.
The second area is domestic violence. More work needs to be done on that. In our sister space, based in Hackney, and Girls in Fulani, her campaign for more training for a culturally appropriate approach and training for police officers around domestic violence and black women. And as Valerie Law, a campaign she's been doing for a number of years, and that got 100,000 a signed petition, which led to a debate in Parliament and some changes. And the third area, which I don't think we do spend much attention on, is the increase in hate crime against people with learning disabilities and autism. And often we don't talk about black people with learning disabilities and autism, but there's more of it. There's lots of undiagnosed. But also, I believe that the police are not taking those hate crimes, particularly from a black perspective, seriously enough. That's just 3 areas.
Thank you so much for that. I'm wondering, Georgie, is it time to move over into questions from the audience? Thank you so much, Patrick. And if you would just wait a moment while we share with you the questions from the audience, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so this is the time people in the audience to start getting them in. So someone asked, how do you ensure, and I guess that means communities, right? This is about community-led accountability. How do communities ensure that police officers are held to the same standards of behavior, regardless of their location or their department? And I think maybe, Patrick, you were talking about very senior officers, right? Like the borough commander. But how do we make sure that all officers are held to the same standards, regardless of their department or their location?
Yeah, well, obviously it's all down to conduct, how conduct and misconduct's treated. Currently, it's a very closed shop. I read it in the papers of the week. Police Federation, that represents all police officers, they spend millions and millions of pounds in defending sometimes the indefensible. And I think if there was a bit more transparency and neutrality around police conduct, I think that would be one step forward, because on the current system, if you abuse a black person on the street, 9 times out of 10 you're going to get away with it. And that's to be a clear message. If you abuse anyone, you're not going to get away with it. So that culture has to change. The process around disciplinary has to change, basically. Obviously, if you're a black police officer, then it's different. Then you're more likely to have the book thrown at you, to be quite honest.
Okay, so based on that, actually, there is another question that just came in, which is, what do you think Black and minority ethnic police officers should be doing to address disparities and get more support from their communities? So like, what role do you think Black officers play in improving police accountability structures?
If you speak to any Black police officer, and I know quite a few, one of the reasons why they join the police is for that very reason. But the part of the problem is when they do join the police, they realise that it's the environment that they're in, the toxicity, the microaggressions, that they're surviving. So some of them have done the best they can, but it's no coincidence that a lot of police officers, some of them, we've still got, I know there's some police officers still around who are doing 20, 30 years and still there. But lots of police officers have left over the years because there's only so much you can take around your mental health. It's no surprise that over the last 2 years, there are about at least 5 memoirs that have come out of ex-serving police officers talking about their lived experiences of many work in the Met Police, actually. You know, whether they're straight or gay, to share their experiences of the racism they experienced, how they've done the best to cope or try and cope, and then eventually they have to leave just for their own sanity.
Yeah. The next question is talking about the parallels, I guess, with mental health. And Jacqui, maybe this is something you can also comment on. So someone said that the new mental health bill is recommending nominated persons to advocate for patients and increase choice and autonomy. Do we need more advocates who are called on to support citizens who are detained to ensure there is transparency in policing process? So is that another kind of method for holding the police accountable, is this idea of nominated persons who are, I guess, who are there to advocate on behalf of citizens?
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, Jacqui, sorry.
No, I think that that's a really good call. And I think that we've got to build in as many checks and balances into the system as we possibly can in order to help the system, the policing behaviour, to actually transform from where it is, which is one which is very poor, is putting it mildly, when it comes to its treatment of Black bodies. And that's the racialized experience, and that is almost like it's a free-for-all for where you want to manifest your anti-Black racism. Join the police force, because then you'll just have a playing field to be able to implement that anti-Black racism with power. So how do you, within that context, which, as Patrick has said, is so toxic that you have to, if you're a Black body that goes into that environment, you can't stay in there, you can't survive there. But for the grace, some really do, because they're looking at the greater works to try and do for improving policing practicing for all diverse communities, but paying particular attention to trying to change a structure that doesn't really want to change because it doesn't really see that it's doing anything wrong. So if that be the context, actually, you have to provide disruption to help the system to learn how to do things differently. And so in that context, yes, advocacy, yes, nominated persons, yes, any kind of checks and balances at any level. It's not just at the level of the commissioner or the borough commander. It's actually got to be at every level that you provide these checks and balances that then operate right down to the local level in the neighborhood, that then is in that interaction between the police and the citizen. As Patrick says, we pay our taxes. We have every right to have the same treatment of dignity and respect in any encounter with any statutory provision, including policing, in a way that is respecting our rights. And so one of the things that we've introduced into mental health via the Mental Health Act is not only the patient and carer race equity accountability framework, which is known as the PCREF, which I think in a way Patrick is sort of inferring towards when he's saying about the NHS constitution. We're talking about a particular framework that could learn from in relation to a race equity accountability framework, where you are working much more closely with communities at every level in order to help you to improve, but where you are taking significant responsibility for your behavior, owning your behavior and doing the work to transform that. And so it's about being really transparent. And so, yes, so the patient and carer race equality framework, the PCREF, is something that I think policing can learn from in London. I think we can, and Marie Gabriel from last week actually mentioned that as well. I think it's a good call. And there's significant learning that could be replicated almost there, because what it is about is empowering people and communities to provide feedback at every opportunity in a way that is bi-directional communication, closer to real time, so that the people can change, the system can change its behavior. We can't go on like this any longer.
Yeah,
it's unsustainable.
So there's another question that came in that is along those lines, and it's kind of what you said, Jacqui, about having a blank page. Someone said, why can't there be a points-based system where stations across the country are evaluated, especially in Black communities, based on the service they provide? And I think it's like station level feedback that's closer to the ground, more real time.
Yes.
But if that was there, then appropriate training and shaming of those stations can be monitored, and accountability to the community can be measured.
Yes.
I guess, Jacqui and Patrick, what's your experience with that type of evaluation, monitoring and measuring, even if in other spaces that you think the police could learn
That's
from?
exactly what the PCREF does. It actually looks at data. So in part one, it's about leadership and accountability, and of the framework, the race equity accountability framework for mental health. And that will be mandatory across systems come April this year. I mean, the first quarter of the financial year, right? So that is where, as this person has said, that in every region, in every neighborhood, in every borough, you will have to have a sort of dashboard which shows the data per borough about your mental health activities, the racialized experience of mental health services, be that in terms of accessing, so you could say the data on stop and search, be that in terms of the data around what you're doing around domestic violence from a racialized perspective. All of the data that is collated, you would have a borough-wide presentation of that data within the dashboard, right? And then you would have, what are the specific activities, this is part two, that you are, in fact, all statutory data relevant to policing you would have in part one, right? All the activities that you are doing that is showing that you are paying attention to making these transformations to change the trajectory of what that data is saying. You would be doing, what partnerships are you doing with the local communities? What co-production are you doing with local communities? How is the workforce better equipping itself to be culturally appropriate and anti-racist and anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive? How is it moving towards being a policing that is fit for purpose of working with diverse communities? Because if you get it right with Black communities, you're getting it right with all the rest of the communities from a diverse perspective. And part three would be finding some measures, I think, and the key one that for me really surfaces is one around trust, right? Where can you get a trust measure in real time that helps to indicate what the racialized experience is of policing? So what kind of app can we develop in that realm that gives real-time feedback around trust, for example? There's so much that if we open our imagination that can be done and not an attack, and building on that which has gone down before and worked before, and you know, that we could move into a place where we could be really progressing this agenda in a significant way. I believe we can.
Yeah.
And that we have no other choice at this juncture but to get down to business.
Yeah. Patrick, with your experience with Windrush, and I think maybe this is a question that you might be able to answer or have some thoughts on. So someone asks or says that a major problem with the police and the scrutiny of their activities is their ability to duck and weave in avoidance of any protocols created. The result is major enforcement powers, which civil society provisions cannot match. So someone's saying there's just a huge power imbalance, right, between how the police can avoid protocols and scrutiny, and then what a community can do to make sure that they uphold those and go along with those. From your experience, how do you think that kind of imbalance in power is addressed to make sure that the communities do have the provisions that match what the police can do?
Well, if you ask me about comparing it to my experience around Windrush, well, there's no comparison, because the Home Office has let down the women's generation. Even the report done by Wendy Williams, which is commissioned by the government, called Lessons Learned Review, one of her recommendations, 3 of the recommendations which the government have dropped, is not to have a migrant commissioner, which will be somewhat independent of the Home Office, to scrutinise the Home Office. One of the criticisms that's always levelled at the police and the Home Office, it marks homework. If you're marking your homework all the time, where is the accountability and scrutiny? But if we mark their homework, we can say 2 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 or whatever. So that's quite clear, and that's a fundamental, you're quite right. Without the police, that's why the police are not accountable. If we start marking their homework, they will become more accountable. I agree with some of the points that Jacqui raised around this. We've got technical ways around capturing data and stuff like that, but the data's got to be linked to, and police like to get paid, especially over time when it comes to football matches and the like, performance-related pay. Just imagine, I'll give you a scenario here. A community panel, we've looked at your data at Brixton Police Station. You failed. You're not going to get your bonus, and actually, you're not going to get promoted, because we want you to sort this out right now, because you may even lose your job. Just imagine that power. Seriously, yes, that would be powerful.
Yes,
that's why I refer to the example in America. I know I saw in the chat someone said, "Why are given this? You should be focused about the UK problems." But America have had more money, more time, more thinking around police accountability than we have in the UK, because they've got big issues in America around police accountability or lack of it. George Floyd, Rodney King. I mean, we have our equivalents of that. Of course we have in the UK. One of the very first campaigns I got involved in was in my hometown, Wolverhampton, Clinton McKerbin, who was murdered by the police in the next clothes shop in 1987. And guess what he said as he was gasping for breath? "I can't breathe." Why do you have to take in 2020, happened in America, for African-American male, for us to start saying, "Oh, this is terrible"? We have enough examples here in the UK, thank you. What we haven't got are those robust, accountable police mechanisms. That's what's missing.
So that goes to that. I mean, that just reinforces the point for me about having a police equity, race accountability framework, because then what happens is that the feedback that comes from the communities, thereby the voices of the constituents that are being disproportionately impacted by poor ways of policing, their feedback, along with the data in terms of the actual stops and searches and this kind of thing, feeds into, for example, the performance-related pay or performance-related promotion or this kind of thing. It actually has an impact on what takes place within the police body at every level. That's the thing around accountability. So those who are experiencing policing, their feedback has value. That's the point. And that value is that they are holding the police to account, and that is helping to address some of that power imbalance, which, you know, which is a significant one, actually. That really, how do you can't, it's very difficult to get it to a point of equality, but you can get it to a point of where there is a serious accountability for that level of resourcing of public money going in, that it needs to be deploying its services in a transparent way that has integrity and is value for money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question. And let's see. This question is again back to the police. I'm going to frame it a bit more about what communities can do. So someone says, when joining the police, you join a team that is expected to back each other up and turn a blind eye for its own protection and its own progression. This develops a culture that protects colleagues and the establishment, thereby changing the very reason why one joined. Officers are told that this culture could save your life because you're a team. How can one develop a whistleblowing mentality for injustice when seen within the police service? So I think that's a question about the police and that internal culture that you guys were talking about before. How do you think a community can make sure that that culture shifts so that it's not about protecting internally?
When you say the community, remember the community, there's community power, there's community influence, you can lobby. Also, I think it's about elected representatives. And the question is, do elected representatives have more power? Because if the community tells if the community tells elected representatives, you're not doing your job around scrutinising the police, then that puts a lot of pressure. Often it's very difficult for the community to influence directly to the police unless there are certain, like me and what Jacqui and myself described this evening, things that you could put in place. You know, so the current structure we have around inclusion is hard because the police, they determine their rations and pay. Obviously, there's some political oversight around, you know, around that, and the current and the Home Office, but the Home Office are not exactly helping at matters. You know, just look at the Winner scandal, what's happening, Rwanda, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, so the way that the culture of the police force is, someone described. I think one of the key things around that description of that culture is really important because it's not inclusive. If you're a woman, if you're neurodiverse, etc. And this applies not just to the police, it applies to the fire service. Only just nearly 2 years ago, a young firefighter called Jaden committed suicide. And it took a culture review, which came out a few months ago, which was quite damning on the fire service.
That's right.
How many reviews do we need to have?
Yes.
You could turn around and say, oh yes, we need to learn the lessons. You know, there were enough reports over the last 20, 30 years around learning the lessons around policing or how it interacts with the community, basically. And one of the key things around the cultural change is about leadership. We use the expression system leadership. Jacqui's very familiar with this expression because she's a system leader too. I'm a system leader. But the problem is actually there's only a handful of us who are system leaders of colour, gender, etc., etc. We still need to change that pale male perspective around system leadership, because otherwise the system will look after itself, and that's what it's been doing basically, and we've got to break that cycle.
So yeah, so I suppose what this is trying to cultivate is the perspectives of our diverse communities, particularly Black communities, about how do we bring solutions to the table so that the police can actually get to a place where it, you know, of its own self can self-assess for injustice, self-assess that it is anti-racist, self-assess that it's been discriminatory and oppressive in its in its practice and actually take responsibility for transforming its behaviour, thereby creating an environment and a context where whistleblowing is actually welcomed as internal feedback to help drive out poor police practice, whereby all these reports that Patrick has referred to time and time and time again reveal the level of, it's like a culture that colludes with its own bad behaviour and makes it okay. But then when we look at the history of where policing emerged from, we can understand that it's got a very tortured history of coming from a place of colonialism and imperialism. And so it's that needs the additional checks and balances, not just from within, but from the position of those that are impacted by its well-entrenched ways that are hangover from those periods of oppression, essentially, and experiencing and treating the black body as inferior. And it needs to learn that that is no longer, it's not sustainable, and it's very unjust, and it's very racist, and it needs to fix up its behavior, because it's supposed to be a service, a police service, not a police force that is forcing, at its worst point, black bodies into debt.
So,
So I
Jacqui,
think that some of the ideas that have really emerged today from both Patrick and the audience are worth exploring further